Do you think posture could potentially change your sex life? As a longtime yogi, since I was 13 years old, I have found postural alignment to be such a pinnacle part of health and vitality. And once I learned about this new postural alignment, my sex life did change. So this episode is going to unpack spinal alignment, pelvic tone, and bowspring, a different kind of alignment practice. The bowspring mechanics unlock fuller orgasms, increase sensitivity, and a more responsive nervous system from the inside out. And we have here expert Paris Latka. You are going to fall in love with this woman. She is amazing. I'm Dr. Willow Brown. I'm here with Leah Piper, and we are the co-hosts of the Sex Reimagined Podcast. We are so grateful for all your likes, your shares, your subscribes. So please keep those coming.
So friends, if you've been a longtime listener, you know what to do. And if you're new to the show, join us by tuning in, turning on, and falling in love with Paris.
Welcome to the Sex Reimagined Podcast, where sex is shame-free and pleasure-forward. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to the show, Paris.
Hey, so grateful to be here.
Yay, I'm so glad you're here, Paris. It's such a funny story. I'm going to start by telling our origin story. But basically, I learned about bowspring from one of the creators of bowspring. I was traveling in Turkey and just met this woman on the road in Turkey, on the dirt road. There she was, and we've become lifelong friends since then. But she and her sister, the Springer girls, went to Africa and had this whole journey in Africa. They were longtime yogis, and they started to see, wow, there's something different going on. And these people are not walking around in pain around hips and shoulders, especially and particularly. And so bowspring was born. And then I happened to be in some other community, and I was like, oh, there's a bowspring training in this other community. And it was Paris. Paris was the trainer in that other community in Naba, which is a really cool community that I love being a part of. And so it was so fun because that was really my first introduction to the work and to the training. And now I follow Paris. She is my primary bowspring teacher. And as somebody who's been a yogi since I was just a little one, it's been really interesting to realign my body and my spine in this new way. So Paris, why don't you tell us a little bit about your own journey? I know you've had struggles with pelvic pain, PCOS, things like that in the past. I'm so curious how bowspring came to you and how it really changed the structure of your body and the way you carried yourself.
Yeah, and how you carried yourself in the bedroom, especially.
Yeah, Leah will keep reorienting us.
Yeah, because I'm kind of doing this biohacking theme, and when Willow was like, posture for better sex, I was like, oh my God, are you serious? But that's what Sex Reimagined is all about, especially from a holistic point of view. If we could step away from shortcuts and have long-term healthy bedroom experiences, what are all the little hacks people can do to live a more holistic life that really enhances their sex life? So please, following up with Willow's question, tell us how this all came about for you.
Yeah, totally. So I met bowspring in 2016. And at that point in my life, I was a very active yoga teacher in the Boulder community. And I loved yoga. I had been practicing and training for 8 years at that point, and attending many vinyasa classes, teaching a lot of vinyasa classes. And I was in pain. Oh my goodness. So I had crazy ass elbow tendonitis. Also a lot of shoulder pain that would kind of come and go, and then neck pain. And it was starting to get to the point where more yoga classes weren't solving it. And I was in the yoga mecca of the West, Boulder, Colorado, and visiting different teachers who I respected and that I gained a lot of value from, seeing them one-on-one for these injuries. And it was only getting worse. So I met bowspring, and it is almost 180 degrees different than modern postural yoga. So it's a mind trip. It's a body trip. The initial alignment was it turned my snow globe upside down, very disorienting. And it was very emotionally triggering. It was physically triggering because it was so different from what it is that I had been learning and teaching and what it is that I knew. And it was asking me to kind of question everything. It was confronting at first. And when I left my first couple of classes, I noticed the emotional rub, the physical uncomfortability, but I noticed that my body was in a lot less pain. I also noticed how freaking good I felt emotionally and energetically, just like so much brighter, so much lighter. And that intrigue got me curious to come back for more and more and more. And eventually it healed the elbow tendonitis, healed the bouts of a crazy neck pain that I would experience. It saved me money because now I didn't have to go to the chiropractor, massage therapist, all of the different healers that I would have to go to for the neck pain. And it really started me on a journey of coming back to myself in a really, really beautiful way.
Can you share a little bit, because I think a lot of people are familiar with what they've experienced in a yoga class and sort of understanding posture for those of us who've been to yoga classes who are listening. So for their minds, how is Bowspring so different?
Bowspring is centered around coming back to the curves of our spine and the curves of our body. So we are so naturally curvilicious. We are not straight lines. We do not move in 90-degree patterns. And so as we integrate the natural curves of the spine, energy begins to flow in a really unique and profoundly healing way. So if we think about anyone who is listening to this, your experience, Leah, your experience, Willow, of being in a yoga class, there's common cues that are shared by any instructor who is working with the modern postural template. And that is draw your shoulders on your back. Suck your belly in and tuck your tailbone. And there's an effort to try and straighten the spine. And what Bowspring is doing is it's looking at the natural curves of the spine. So like we can all visualize that in our mind's eye right now. And there's parts of the spine where it goes in and there's parts of the spine where it goes out. And if we move with those patterns, not against them, trying to straighten them, but we move with them, then we begin to move with a lot more ease and not moving against nature, but moving more with the nature of our bodies. So as we integrate the spinal curves, then we're mapping the curves through our whole body. There's a curve that lives in every joint. And when that is embodied and truly felt while you're in a posture, then you are training the muscles to engage that are above and below the joint. And when the muscles engage, that's what's holding your body rather than the joint holding your body and letting the muscles get away with not engaging because the joint is holding the body. If we are, so what that would look like is like you're bearing weight on your hands and your elbows are hyperextended. Or if you are standing and your knees are hyperextended, this is a very common postural pattern. And if the knees are hyperextending, then you're neglecting that curve that lives in the knees, and we're inhibiting the way that blood circulates through our bodies. And we're also inhibiting the muscles above and below the joint to actually engage and to play their part and their role at creating a support system for the body.
So are they basically the same postures in yoga? You're just not being rigid and how straight your body is shaping the asana?
Yes,
is it completely different
and no.
position?
Yeah, it's pretty different.
It's pretty different, but there are some similarities as well. Like what people in yoga would call downward dog, we call crouching cat. And so it's on your hands and on your knees, but there are some specific things that we're doing to move with integrating the curves as we move rather than just moving in straight lines and letting the energy drop and being held by the joints rather than the muscles.
Interesting.
One of the things that Micah was explaining to me is, you're more stretching the bones rather than stretching the muscles, and particularly the attachment sites of tendon and ligament to muscle and bone, which is, in yoga, there's a lot of like shearing of the muscle coming off the bone. Whereas with bowspring, it's like you're pulling the muscle back to the bone, but then you're stretching the bone. So it's I went to a yoga. So basically you can do anything with bowspring alignment, right? You can hike a mountain, you can ride a bike, you can swim in the ocean, you can do a yoga class with bowspring alignment, but it's just going to be like a different sort of, you're going to be paying attention to the mounds and the curves, right? The mounds and the hollows, as Paris would say. Like the top of the knee is a mound and behind the knee is a hollow. And for me, I have just sort of like crossed the threshold from like, the point of no return. Like I can't go back. I'm starting to notice like, gosh, if I don't get in my bowspring alignment, I feel pain in my body. Whereas before I was like, gosh, bowspring alignment feels awkward and like not comfortable in my body, but it's absolutely healing my neck and shoulder pain, like in such a profound way. And bringing it around to sex, I have experienced some of the most phenomenal orgasms of my life because the Sushumna Nadi, that central column of energy that runs from our pelvic floor all the way up to our crown, is now is the connective tissue around that energetic channel is holding it in that S curve alignment. So there's just more space for the energy to flow through.
Okay, now I need to go look for a bowspring class in Carmichael, California. Now I'm like really curious. I imagined that where the interconnected piece regarding sexuality was going to be from the energetic. Yeah, so tell us a little bit. I think you said you had PCOS. Has bowspring helped you with that? And can you describe what that is? Because I know there's a lot of women who suffer from that.
Yeah, polycystic ovarian syndrome. It was very loud in my life about 15 years ago. And it was a lot of congestion. My body was congested. And it was congested for a variety of different reasons. One of the primary reasons was it was, when the front ribs are dropping, I didn't know how to hold my body. I didn't know how to be in my body. I didn't really know how to move and posture my body in life, and life is dynamic. And so I had perpetually was in a posture where my ribs were dropping and my belly was closing and my pubis was tucking under. So like it, a big C curve. And then I would go to yoga and I would stretch all out and I would open my heart and I would melt my back hard and I would feel great. And it was so lovely for the time that it held me. And however, I would leave a yoga class and then I would go back to these old postural patterns of closed belly, dropping ribs, and getting really heavy. And it was lacking any internal support. And so I think a lot of lifestyle had a ton to do with the PCOS. I had a really intense eating disorder for 7 years that I know had contributed hugely to the PCOS. So there's a lot of moving pieces. And then it was, it really cleared. I was told by a doctor that I would always have cysts on my ovaries and I would always probably have very intense periods. And I would probably not be able to get pregnant. And this was just kind of my life and like, good luck. And so I swallowed that prescription. I bought into that story that was told about me in my body. And it was me kind of questioning like a couple of years into taking their medication, birth control, and metformin, which is like a blood sugar regulator, that I was like, wait a minute, I want to learn more about this. And so I started seeing a naturopathic doctor, and that was huge, very transformational. And so, I had PCOS maybe like 8 years before I met Bowspring. What is incredible is that I was told that the cysts would probably always be there, and maybe you can manage the hormones. Like it's manageable, but the cysts are probably going to be on your ovaries. And so then fast forward to a few years after being diagnosed, I would get an ultrasound, cysts are there. Several years later, I would get an ultrasound, cysts are still there. Fast forward to meeting Bowspring, maybe 2 years into my practice, I got an ultrasound and the cysts were gone. And that was amazing to me. And I don't contribute it all to Bowspring, but I do know that it was absolutely fundamental to helping me to create space in my body and less congestion. And so it's like, as you learn to fill and open your ribs and expand the shape that they naturally are, and then expand into the shape that my hips naturally are, and employ my spinal curves, they just create more space in your digestion, in the womb, in your ovaries, everywhere. And then everything works that much more efficiently. So digestion works that much more efficiently, detox, elimination, healthy cycles.
I've heard another Bowspring teacher talk about how she used to have chronic constipation, and Bowspring totally eradicated that for her. So I think what you're speaking to, like the spaciousness that we have the ability to create in our body, gives our body so much more opportunity to function at optimal higher levels, right? And then there's also what you talk about a lot, Paris, and when you're teaching, is like just embodying your body, like being more full and more present in the world, right? It like builds a level of confidence, like take up space, take up all the space in your hip girdle and your pelvic floor, and take up all the space in your radiant heart and your shoulders, and, really lift and open. It doesn't have to be right now, but at some point I want you to weave in how the pelvic floor muscles kind of work and shift into a more strengthened way when we're actually spreading the sit bones and opening, the space between pubic bone and tailbone.
And what I think is so valuable is that this is a practice that really guides us into safety with ourselves. And oftentimes where we don't feel safe in our bodies, there's a lot of insecurities that are like running the show. There is a lot of outdated, limited beliefs that we're still holding in our body and that are influencing our behavior towards ourselves, our relationships with others.
Holding back our orgasms big time.
Holding back our orgasms, holding back our expression. And so what Bowspring does is and this is so fundamental to sex, to everything, is that it first teaches us like how to open and feel safe while opening. Usually we feel safe with closing because it's protected and it's vulnerable to open. Our bellies especially, and our necks, the places in our body that aren't protected by any bones. And, the belly and the neck have a lot of nerves. And so it's so wise to close when we do feel threatened, when we're really exhausted, when we're highly stressed. Like this closure posture is very, very valuable for our health, for our well-being, and knowing when to shift out of it and to emerge from our closed posture. Like, okay, I got what I needed to get from here, and now I can open again, and I can, and it's through the opening that we actually generate a stronger connection to self, and then we carry that open energy in our lives. Going back to what Willow said about the bones very quickly. So in Bowspring, and this makes it very unique in that it activates, we learn to activate all of the muscles and the fascia because the fascia lives inside of the muscles. We learn to activate it as a unit in circumferential tone. This is unique to anything else out there, because what you typically, different Pilates or fitness or yoga, whatever it is it's isolating certain muscles and it's working those muscles in isolation to the rest of the muscles. But our muscles don't live independently from all the other muscles. They don't live in a vacuum. They live in relationship to all of the other muscles. So we're asking the muscles that have been really strengthened, they're really well patterned at engaging. We ask those muscles to back off so that the sleepier muscles, the muscles that have been flying under the radar, that have been catching a free ride on all of the muscles that have been overworking, we ask them to show up, to wake up, to participate. It's first as an idea, and then it becomes a practice of how to embody and to engage all of the muscles and let them hug in towards the bones. And this is this like, ooh, I'm coming in towards self. I'm generating safety because it is a hug. It's a hug. And like, think about when you're getting a hug from a really good friend and you can melt into their arms, or your lover, and you feel safe in that hug. This is what we're providing for ourselves first. Then it's
nice.
from receiving ourselves and our muscle engagement, we then expand the bones and stretch the bones as we're simultaneously hugging in towards and engaging the muscles. So it's this really fucking cool dynamic of muscles and fascia and bones and the interplay of how they all work together, because like this is one unit. I'm touching my body, I'm looking at your bodies, it's all connected. And we've for so long have isolated certain parts from the whole, and it has not worked. So we create safety inside of ourselves first, and then we can open to life. We can open to our lover with that much more presence. We're feeling confident and held from the inside. We feel safe to open, and we're engaging in life from that place rather than closed.
I love what you're saying right now, because it's almost, it's like I'm also kind of my sub-dom BDSM mind's activating too, because it's like you're creating containment for yourself, right? With the muscles into the bones, it's like you're creating this more contained experience to your nervous system. So that's sort of like, you know, the container, the sort of like dominant role. And then the bones get to soften and expand and melt out and be more submissive and more pliable. It's just such a trippy, really cool. There's a lot of in bowspring. There's a lot of pulling in and stretching out, you know, going on, a lot of dynamic. Go ahead,
You
Leah.
know, as I'm hearing you speak, Willow, and you, Paris, it's making me think about perimenopause and menopause and the bone density in women that drops so severely. And I'm curious if there's been any studies between people who practice bowspring and their skeletal health. You guys probably don't know. It's probably too new of a system for there to show. It would be really great to get a classroom of women who all go get bone tests,
That would be cool.
like before
Yeah.
they started, and then 2 years after doing a practice or 6 months after doing a practice, to see what's going on with their bone health.
That would be a
'Cause
really
I'm really
cool
curious how
experiment.
much this would
Yeah.
affect it, or if it doesn't affect it at all, or, you know, whatever.
I
I'm kind of
would be
obsessed with
very
that right now.
curious at that data as well. What I do know is that whenever, like if you were just to kind of like squeeze your bicep right now without even like doing anything, right, you feel that engagement. And then of course relax it. But whenever the muscle is hugging in towards the bones, it is feeding the bone blood flow, and it's dropping off all the minerals. And so, you know, this is why weight bearing exercises are so valuable for a lot of, you know, especially women who are getting older. But if you're looking for that squeezing of the muscles in towards the bone where it can feed all of the bone, its minerals and nutrients.
Okay.
What is really cool though is that we emulate a lot of lifting heavy things. Like we're using our own body weight primarily in bowspring, and the results are pretty fantastic in just the way that people feel and their journey, their commitment to the practice, because of that it's this feedback loop of supporting wellness. They can feel it supporting wellness. They feel stronger. They feel bouncier. They feel lighter, and also really, really grounded all simultaneously. So though those numbers aren't there, anecdotally, there's a lot of stories of just feeling so strong.
Well, I think if you take a look at the weight loss peptides that are on the market today, one of the most concerning things about them is how they reduce muscle composition, which is then affecting the skeleton. And so, like, the big thing there is they're trying to improve the drug so that there isn't so much muscle loss, which is creating skeletal loss. Like, the two are really tied in together. And then you've got women who are mid-age, who also are having a hard time losing weight. And now we're on these peptides and we're finally losing weight, but it's at the risk of also losing muscle and skeleton. So I just feel like this, from a sexuality wellness standpoint, it all ties in together. And so we have the emotional piece, which is feeling safe and feeling like you can live in your body safely. And if you can live in your body, then you're going to enjoy sex more. If you're in your head or you're out of your body, you're not even home for sex. You're just going through the motions. And then we have the physical aspect of like allowing, like, who do we become when we allow the curve of our spine and the curve of our bodies, especially as women, when we embrace the curves. Like, it's so symbolic, again, on like another
so
sexual,
sexy.
sensual level,
Yeah.
right? And then we have the physiological, the hope that our skeleton is getting stronger, that we're bringing more blood to our skeleton, and that the fascia and the muscles we're experiencing a sense of oneness and wholeness within our own system. And so when you bring all those things together, it's actually quite easy to see. But then if you add the energetic, like you were saying, Willow, when we're opening up space and we are moving stagnation and congestion, then energy gets to run through our system with more efficacy, and therefore like undulating pleasure and all the tingles and all the feelings. Where like an orgasm is no longer a sneeze in your clitoris. It's now a full body breath after breath after breath, an undulation. That serpent is riding through your body, up through your crown and into heaven. And baby, now we're home. Born free.
Ow! Woo! Exactly.
Did I encapsulate that pretty well?
Yeah, that was well done, Leah. Really
Incredible.
beautifully. Yeah.
We summed it up.
Tied it all together. I love that. When you were talking about, the peptide, I'm super into promoting peptides and supporting people and getting
and
them.
I'm taking
as
them,
you
so
all
it
know.
really matters to me,
Yeah, I mean, and I'm taking them too. Paris will be taking them soon too. But it is, and they talk about how important it is to, eat a lot of protein and make sure you're doing weight-bearing exercises when you're taking them. That's very, very commonly talked about. And for me, every time I would pick up a set of weights, I would throw my neck out, right?
Oh,
I would
really?
be out of alignment and I couldn't move, and I'd be fucking have to start all over again for like 2 or 3 weeks of healing and go to the chiropractor and go to the massage therapist and spend all the money, And so with bringing Bowspring in, it's like, I now am like just doing the minimal set of weights and going way super slow so that I can actually pay attention to my alignment as I'm doing the weights. And I can feel when I go too far so that I know I need to pause, roll back, do Bowspring on that neck and shoulder area. That's, the sticky spot, so that I can advance in a way that will actually support the longevity of my bone health.
Okay, so we've really kind of covered, a wide spectrum of why this is important for women. Is there anything you can say that would, help the guys listening, the penis owners out there? Is there anything significant that's worth mentioning about how Bowsprings affects their body? I mean, I'm assuming same, but different, I don't know.
Same, but different. Men are so enhanced by this. Oh my goodness.
Really?
Finally, they have permission to untuck their butt. Now they have permission to open their pelvic floor. They have permission to open and undulate in there. So I appreciate that you brought the undulation part forth, because as we know, life is dynamic, sex is dynamic, right? We're not just standing here, not moving, and hopefully. And so so we take the dynamism of life and understanding that life moves, and we take that into the bowspring practice. So we pulse, we move inside of our postures because that's the natural living rhythm of life. It pulses.
Right. Pulsation
Well,
of life.
Pulsation of life. And so we let that come into the architecture of our poses. And as a result of the undulation, people just feel so much more alive, clearer. They feel like the mind isn't as located just to the brain, but they're feeling their mind open inside of their body. With that, their sensitivity increases, not in a bad way, in a way that I can sense, I can feel more. And that is just a major turn on for life, is this this posture that reflects this capacity to move, to feel, to sense. And so men feel, I've had the opportunity to teach several men. Way more women are drawn to this practice, but the men who come, they love it. And it's so healing for them.
I got to tell you, Paris, real quick.
Yeah.
I've had several men, including my brother, dear friends, and they're all like, I've got this back pain, like my low back. And so this is another huge thing. It just gets them out of pain. And I'm like, okay, try this. Just stand with your feet a little bit further apart than your hips, just slightly wide of your hip structure. And then push your heels without moving your feet. You want to draw your heels back and then wide. So you're making like an arc with your heels.
Oh,
and
I can feel that.
That immediately, you can do it while you're sitting. That immediately accentuates the whole back chain. You can feel your S curve come online. Your chin lifts. The back of the neck starts to arc. The low back has its beautiful sway and its beautiful arc, but it's supported by bigger muscle groups like the glutes, the quads, the QLs on either side of the spine. And so I've had at least 5 or 6 men be like, oh my God, just doing that immediately eradicates my back pain.
So
Amazing.
You're pressing your heels back and then you're pressing them out. You're not moving. It's just
exactly.
You're just pressing and pushing. You know what else that came to mind when you said like permission to, would you say drop your ass?
Relax your butt.
Relax your ass.
Because Leah and I are always talking about coaching men to not squeeze their ass when they're getting to orgasm. Every time, and women too, every time you get toward an orgasm, your butt cheeks squeeze.
But you know what else? Some research is showing that the predominant cause of premature ejaculation is due to a chronically tight pelvic floor.
Makes
so if you're
total
relaxing
sense.
your pelvic floor, I'm really curious how it would help people who feel embarrassed that they don't have a lot of ejaculatory control.
Let's talk about pelvic floor and structure then. That's perfect segue.
Great. So in the bowspring, there is an emphasis because we're just looking at the natural map of the body and we're like, oh, wow, the hip girdle is wide, and it will be wider in women than it is for men. However, it is still broad. And so if we move into the broadness of the bones and we allow our hips to expand, they'll move slightly behind the ribs. That is setting the glutes up to be able to engage and to fire more and more in our lives. So oftentimes there is a lot of freaking tension and tightness in the pelvic floor for a variety of different reasons: trauma, tension, locked jaw, a lot of emotions stuck. But also one of them being is that we just don't know how to really utilize the butt. And so we're these big muscles in the back of our body. If someone were to be like, hey, tone your butt, like squeeze your butt muscles, what would you do?
You would squeeze, draw them down and in. Yeah.
And you can even do that. And you're like, oh, the lower back loses itself when we do that. And the pelvic floor, the pelvis, it narrows in if you're squeezing the bones down and in. So you're taking a part of your body that wants to be wide and you're diminishing that width through squeezing the glutes in and then pushing them down. And ouch, no, we don't want to be doing that because, well, unless you want more tension and you do want more constriction in your body, then that's a good way to do it. But bowspring, it really emphasizes lighting up the whole back of the body from the hips wide and the ribs wide and lifting. And you actually begin to learn to tone your butt in an upward direction from your heels. So I'm not going to go into all of that. It's really fucking cool. It's really, really amazing. But where it is very
and
relevant,
sexy, I might add.
Yeah, it's very sexy. And it's sexy because it's functional. We like
It's
see
also
the
just
shape
hot.
and we're like, oh, wow. Like that's a sign of health. That's a sign of back body is online. This is a person who has themselves. And I think that just naturally is very appealing. And we're learning how to widen at the base of the spine through the pelvic floor, if you're a man or if you are a woman. And as we occupy space in this region of the body, not only do we begin to heal pelvic floor tissue, the chronic muscles that are always firing because the glutes maybe haven't been working. And this is such a high real estate part of the body, the base of the spine, and the nervous system is going to prioritize safety at all costs. Like it needs to be supported.
Root chakra. Yeah.
It's a root chakra.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And so if we're not rooted or feeling support because the muscles aren't on board, the gluteal muscles, then it's going to be recruiting any muscles in the pelvic floor, ligaments included, to, hey, I need you as a structural support. You got blood flow, you're going to do it. And so then all of a sudden that pattern becomes chronic and pelvic floor tension increases. And so does irritability. And so does like our like being pissed off and not relaxed in our body and rushing towards an orgasm rather than relaxing
Letting it come
into
to
the
you.
experience of it.
So I'm wondering if this would reduce vulvar pain, pain in the introitus,
100%.
painful sex. You know, there's so many women, especially who are suffering from sex just fucking hurting, you know?
In my experience, that is, well, there's so many factors, right? Mind, body, spirit. So physiologically, that's where I'll speak to right now, is that there is so much locked tension in the pelvis. And there are muscles that are involuntarily gripping because we need that internal support. And if it's not getting it from the major muscle groups, then it's going to be getting it some way, somehow.
Yeah.
And then done perpetually, it creates pain, not only when you're having sex, especially when you're having sex though, but when you're like walking around in your life and you're just trying to like live. So if you imagine a central channel moving through your pelvic floor, up through the center of your body, up through the crown of your head, and you want this channel to be open. And as the channel opens at the base, it begins to ripple up through the whole spine, through the neck, and through the head. And everything begins to become like we have to create safety to open. We're not going to open if we don't feel safe. So we have to create that internal environment of safety. And then we can learn to open. And that is our pelvic floor is included in that. And so it's so valuable to look at like why it's tense, why it's closing, what sort of patterns are going on that is perpetuating that. And then going back to this primal alignment that we experience so much less pain and more freedom inside of, because it's just natural, it's nature, it's what we know, and we've been shaped out of it in our modern lives.
Yeah, it's interesting too. You were mentioning like emotions, like there can be a lot of emotional release. I think you said that at the top of the hour.
Tears.
Yeah. And so like when you're starting to fix what is closed and chronically tight and protective physiologically, it helps unwind the emotions that come from holding those frozen grips. And I think it was you, Willow, who mentioned the base chakra. And for those of you who don't know the chakras, this is the area of the anal sphincter muscles, a lot of the pelvic floor, the anal cavity, and it really represents security. So
And
when
safety.
you don't feel secure sexually, when you don't feel secure financially, when you don't feel secure in your ability to open and relax and let go, when you don't feel secure that your heart is being taken care of in the world, when you don't feel secure about your mental health, you know, all these things end up showing up in ways that our body grips for control. to try to not feel
protects.
so fragile.
Yeah.
So I can just imagine some of the tears. I mean, you can see that in yoga classes too. What's been your
My
experience?
first bowspring workshop, Paris was there, and it was Desi Springer was teaching it with John Friend, and we got into these postures and positions. Like, I'll just start crying thinking about it right now. It's like it just unlocks these deep places where you've been holding your whole life. It's like breaking up these places of protection that are held in the tissues. And when you unlock them, it's total fucking relief. It's just like tears of gratitude and joy for like freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom. And also like what you've been speaking to, Paris, like trusting yourself, trusting that you got you.
That's really beautiful.
So powerful. We've heard possibly the adage of you keep your issues in your tissues.
Oh yeah, we say that all the time.
Yeah. Okay. So this works with the superficial layers of the body, and it works just as deeply with the deepest depth of our bodies. And it's learning how to meet ourselves there. And it's like just that in and of itself, if a person has been self-abandoning themselves, betraying themselves, not in a trusting relationship with themselves, it begins to orient them back to this place where they can start to rebuild. And it's really powerful because then as you're breathing and as you're moving in these conscious ways that are signaling safety to your nervous system, that will give you the chance to release the emotions that have been hardened in those places, and on just repeat the patterns of holding and gripping and tensing and closing begin to unwind.
It's really shaping up to look like a real somatic therapy, which I think in many ways is probably more productive than talk therapy, which is really interesting. Kind of
so
as
true.
we started this conversation, I was like, okay, another exercise class.
Right.
Well, it's certainly appearing to be much deeper than that.
So
That's
much
beautiful.
more. I mean, as somebody myself, I've been teaching yoga, Pilates, and Qigong for decades, and all three of those postural alignments are all about squeezing the abdominals, ribs down and in, shoulders back and down, chin in, neck lengthened, tailbone down. It's all a posture of rigidity and protection, and like being it's a more militant posture, actually. I mean, one of the things they say in bowspring is like, do you know any animals in nature who do abdominal contractions? No, there are none. And so there's this thing. And one of the things I love about having a dog is I'm like, oh my God, my dog is a natural bowspringer. And so he'll be next to me while I'm doing my practice, right? And because they've got they're on all fours. So they've got that, what's that big muscle? So this is the muscle that we all spiral out of, the psoas muscle. It's one of the first muscles to develop in the embryo, actually. There's a whole book by Liz Koch called the Psoas book, and it's fascinating. And I used to study the psoas all the time. And it's a huge place where we hold contraction and fear. So the psoas is a giant swath of tissue that connects your lower back to your front of your body and your legs to your torso. So it's this huge thing. And four-legged animals have a lot more slack in their psoas. But because we're standing upright bipedal, we've got this super taut psoas all the time. So psoas is one of the main places that I'll work if somebody comes in with low back pain. And I've been all up in people's psoas for years, and it's fascinating what comes out emotionally, because it is a place where we hold fear, we hold uncertainty, we hold doubt, we hold insecurity. And so when you're really working and opening that tissue, it's not uncommon for the tears to flow,
It's also very uncomfortable.
It
Like
can
it
be
feels
very
filled with
painful.
nerve. It feels nervy, like,
Yeah,
oh, you know,
can
kind of
be
that
very.
tingle of like, oh God, you know, you kind of want to
Yes.
elbow someone who's working on it,
Yeah, you're like,
which
get the
feels
fuck away from me.
protective. Like when
Yeah.
I feel that sensation, there's a feeling of like threat I need to protect, and almost like I want to fight. Like I do literally want to elbow
Yes.
the roller that I'm on.
Yes. Totally.
Fuck you, roller.
Totally. 100%. So what I love about what Bowspring is really teaching though is like how to lift. This is what's been hardest for me, and I think hardest for so many who are new to the practice, is like how to lift the upper body away from the lower body so that there's nothing but length and space between the hips and the ribs. The belly is actually relaxed, which helps it actually strengthen more because there's all that length between the two. And then there's slack. There's so much more slack in the psoas.
So that was going to be one of my questions, because when you take a look at things like yoga and especially Pilates, and you're working at bringing the belly button back to the spine to create a contraction so that you have a stronger core, how is Bowsprings supporting that desire to have a stronger core? You know, if you're allowing the belly to relax, is there in some place at getting that contraction to help with core strength?
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't end on soft. We use soft as the entryway into lifting the ribs out of the hips. So like it's very difficult to lift your ribs if your belly is like hardened. You're like lift your ribs. You're like, oh, how do I do that? So you soften the belly, let that energy start to pulse in and out of that tissue. Long, slow, deep belly breaths. We're just all love that, you know, to relax the vagus nerve and to get energy moving through the whole channel from the pubis all the way up through the crown. So then when the ribs lift, the hips root back. They're always moving oppositionally from each other. Then you can begin to, and your lower back curve is present. Then you can begin to tone your core like none other. And it is the coolest experience that is actually very effective at toning the core. So we're evolving from the days of six-pack abs, especially as women. And because if you think about, if you're closing the ribs into the hips and you're shortening the torso, let me just show you this visual super quick. If this top hand were my ribs and this bottom hand were my hips, and they're closing in on one another, like everyone's ribs are dropping into their hips, most likely. Look at the center of the Chinese finger freedom toy. It moves outward.
If you really see this in old people's bodies.
Yes.
As their skeletons start to shrink, you could just see ribs and hips, man. That's so interesting.
The waist widens. So if you pull the ribs out of the hips, I'm showing this toy here, you begin to you lengthen the belly and the waist begins to narrow, taper in. You come back to this more hourglass-ish shape. Everyone is shaped different though, but we want curves at the waist. This is a sign of health. So you first go soft, long, strong, soft through the belly, then you get long, then you can begin to ignite the 360 degrees of the core. So every direction of the core begins to experience this tapering in effect. And it's so effective at healing abdominal separation, just building more strength through the abs, but it's an intelligent strength. It's not a hard, rigid, shortened strength.
I have to say for myself, like since I've been doing Bowspring, especially, I mean, I taught Pilates like 5 to 10 classes a week for over 10 years, you know? So I have such a different relationship to my core strength now than, you know, it feels so much more flexible, so much more free, not so like, there was always this like in the back of my mind, this pressure and this like thought process of like, oh yeah, ribs down and in, belly back, you know, constantly kind of like harping on myself to get back into that, you know, militant postural alignment. And since I've been bringing this length and this softening to the belly, I mean, that's where a lot of the emotional release comes up from for me, for sure.
Fascinating.
Because
this has been so cool.
Yeah, I think especially in our relationship to our bodies as women, there's so much pressure to have a flat, perfect belly and a perfect shaped body and all of, that. And so we don't get there's so much pressure to like, it's not just a physical health thing. It's also like
About being desirable.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not valuable if I don't have, so
Yeah.
there's this lack and this pressure mentality that goes with that constant like belly back, ribs down and in, and so it's just been, I'm like, here's my belly, it's soft, it's open, and sometimes it sticks out a little bit, so who fucking cares?
Yeah. I think actually what's very desirable to touch is a supple belly.
Oh, every man says it. Like, I love how soft your belly is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So powerful.
And what is really cool, okay, like 10,000 things cool about bowspring, but like you do learn to take it into your everyday life, into the things that you're doing. And so that is with sex. And it is a posture that is dynamic and full. And after exploring with yourself first, so like on your mat, like what does filling my ribs feel like? What does softening my belly like? Oh my God, what does rooting my hips back feel like? So getting to know this alignment with yourself first is very valuable. And then when you're practicing it more and more and you're exploring it in your everyday activities, then you begin to explore taking it into the bedroom and literally embodying this open posture of vitality while making love with your partner. In my experience, it enhances the physical and the energetic exchange. It increases my capacity to give. It increases without giving of myself, it increases my capacity to receive. And it's such a beautiful posture. It reflects life. And like once like your partner gets taste of a bowspring booty, like, oh my God, like it's such a turn on for the experience that you all, that people are sharing together.
I think, one of the things that I've always been a big proponent of when it came to yoga and sex was helping people realize that as they age, they become more stiff. And once you're more stiff, your ability to be in different positions, it becomes limited. And so now you only have like your 3 lovemaking positions, and people's hips hurt and their knees hurt and they can't bend and they can't sit. And, you're basically just lying down. Or you're trying to get someone to the edge of the bed. I mean, there's all these limitations that happen when you can't sit back on your knees. So how much does bowspring, I mean, just from what you've described, I'm assuming, but I don't want to assume, that it is increasing people's flexibility?
Big time.
Yeah.
Their flexibility, but more like elasticity. When we're opening and expanding our tone, rather than when somebody says like flex, usually people get smaller to flex their muscles. And so we're learning how to expand the bones to engage the muscles. And as a result of that, we build so much elasticity in our body. Elasticity is synonymous with flexibility. We can move in different ranges, in different planes. And we are also like feeling more flowing. It's not as clunky or as like the movement isn't as hard. It just feels more flowing because we're hydrating the connective tissue, and connective tissue will feel floating, light, resilient, and very strong when it's healthy. And so, yes, absolutely increasing flexibility, increasing strength, increasing our capacity to be in this world. And then we extend that to all of the things that we do, sex and beyond.
How easy or how hard is it to find a bowspring class in the average American city right now?
Well, we're a rare breed.
Okay.
But it's becoming more and more popular. It just had its 13th birthday. And so there are
can people do it online if they can't?
Yeah.
You can do it with Paris online. Paris has an amazing membership. Great. She's got free classes.
Yeah,
that
tell
you
us
can
about your
test
membership.
out.
Yeah, so I have if anybody feels intrigued from listening to our conversation, I recommend going to my YouTube channel and checking out some of the free resources that I have there, just so that you're like, okay, like what is this thing that this lady is talking about? And you can like start to feel it. And then
What's the name of your YouTube channel?
It's my name, Paris Latka. And then if people want to learn more, because it is a pretty in-depth system and it's intricate, which is really cool. It takes you through a whole tour of your body, but I don't give that download on YouTube. I have online courses for that. And then once somebody has an established practice and a basic understanding of the foundations of Bowspring, they're invited to come into my membership. But that's more for experienced people. For beginners, I recommend my YouTube channel and my online course.
Or even the course you did on NABA, because that course was where I really like got introduced. I thought that was a great, really good, lots of great instruction and introductory. So super good. The other thing I just want to say in closing, for me, it's a white tantric practice. You know, like I am on the mat making sound and moving stuck energy. And I actually went to this yoga class yesterday and I was doing bowspring throughout the whole, 90-minute class. And at the end, the woman next to me was like, God, it was so nice to be right next to you, because I could really hear your breath and your sound. And it felt like you were so embodied in your practice. And it was so inspiring. I was like, I'm glad it wasn't annoying. She's like, no, not for me. I loved it. I was like, okay, cool. Because I mean, as a Dakini and as a Tantrika, we always are using sound to move stuck energy. And I love the freedom that, you really bring forth in that practice, Paris. It's really valuable.
Cool. Yeah, the
Paris,
sound. I just can't. It's like trying to make love without any sounds. It's like
totally
right. It's not nearly as good.
Organic and it's
And what's your website?
IamHealthSanctuary.com.
And can people follow you on social media? What are your handles?
Please do. Yeah. My main active account is on Instagram, and it's Paris-Latka.
Great. Thank you so much for being on the show. Really lovely to have you, and excited to have you on our biohack series. I'm definitely going to be looking into bowsprings. It sounds irresistible.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for being open to the conversation, especially not knowing anything about bowspring. I really appreciate that. And thank you, Willow, for inviting me. And what a true honor and pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Yay. Thank you.
Okay, folks, the show isn't over. Please stay tuned for the dish.
Now, our favorite part, the dish.
So what'd you think?
I really enjoyed it. I really, really loved all the different levels of wholeness that it matches up to. I was just thinking about when you were talking about like the heels, like pushing the heels back and spreading them without moving your actual feet, that's going to really help Matt.
Huge.
I think it's going to be a game changer for his body. So
Yeah.
I'll be really curious to see if there's anyone doing classes here in Sacramento.
It
they are.
hasn't really like stuck in California. California
no?
is so into yoga. Like they just haven't. John Friend was the
Mr.
Anusara king.
Anusara, yeah. Talk about rigid postures and
Right.
structure.
It's the total exact opposite
Yeah.
of what Anusara taught. And, and now he's working with Desi Springer, and they're big in Europe, big in Colorado, big in certain places. I mean, I would love to get to a level where I could teach bowspring in Santa Barbara, but there's really no point. Like I don't think it will catch on. People are just
It's almost like
really
you have to teach
into
yoga, but through the bowspring lens, so you're not calling it bowspring.
Totally. And a lot of bowspring teachers will go through that transition where they're like, I'm just going to teach yoga postures with bowspring alignment. And you can do some kind of hybrid of that, but eventually all the bowspring teachers do just go into 100% teaching.
Can they just call it bowspring yoga? Because then that might help.
I know it might help. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could call it that for sure. Desi and John are really, really open, and they're so just generous with their knowledge and their wisdom. I mean, if you go to bowspring.com, you'll see Desi Springer's body. Her body is like my body muse. She's got the most amazing rockin' healthy, strong, muscular, tight, but flexible body I've ever seen. And it's just, it's really inspiring to be in class with her. And then my dear friend Micah, who lives in Turkey, who I go and visit whenever I can, she just carries her body in bowspring all the time. We were driving around Turkey in her little car, and she was never leaning back on the seat. She was always had her alignment on point. Like everything she does, she's doing in that way. And you heal so much faster. Like if you have an injury, you have a fall, you have a back thing or
Well,
anything.
that was really compelling to hear both of your stories of chronic pain in your
Yeah,
joints and in your neck, and how you're really resolving that. Because I've got friends who are chiropractors. They're like, my biggest business is yoginis and yogis,
totally.
like coming in. Like
Totally.
that's the market who I serve the most, is people injuring themselves doing yoga.
For sure. I mean, and that's what Micah has been telling me for years. She's like, all the big yogis, all the old school big time yogis, they eventually, after having surgeries, hip surgeries, shoulder surgeries and stuff, they come crawling back to bowspring and they're like, okay, I'm ready to change,
Wow.
So it's very interesting. And again, this whole alignment practice was born out of Micah and Desi going and traveling around Africa. Micah is an incredible author as well. So she wrote a book called Keepers of the Story, and she's been traveled all over Africa. She did like a nomadic journey for a year when she was 20 years old or 25 or something, I don't know, young. And so she's got this relationship to the African culture and way and people. And it was, after like Desi and Micah had multiple yoga studios that were really successful all over Boulder and Denver and Colorado. And when they started to do this new bowspring form, they lost tons of students. And eventually they let go of their studio, and then Micah was like, I'm done being in the spotlight, so she's off doing her own thing. And Desi and John are basically the pioneers of it. And then there's a bunch of teachers who are kind of like just geeked out, primary, super committed, like Paris. And I just love Paris has a really good online presence, and she's very accessible, and she's a sweetheart. So
Well, it's really telling because when John Friend is very well known in yoga communities of his Anusara practice. Anusara was like, it hit the nation like a wave. Everyone was doing Anusara. It was like
Yeah.
a level up from Ashtanga. It was like considered like being in such form. It was all about form, form, form. This way of holding the system. So to have him, go do a 360.
Yeah.
Really kind of shows some flexibility in being able to be influenced, because a
Yeah.
lot of people, especially when you create a method, you get stuck on that method.
That
It's
you're
like, that's
so
my
huge
method,
and known for.
and
Yeah.
you end up having a hard time shifting gears. So the
Yeah.
fact that Desi did that and then John followed in that same style is really says a lot about the practice. It makes me very curious.
Yeah, I mean, and
And
John is a deep scholar too.
cool. Thanks for bringing Paris on. It was fun.
Yeah, super
Yeah.
fun. Hope you all
Curious,
enjoy.
what y'all think about
Mhm.
this idea, especially the yogis out there.
I
Has
know
your
there's
mind
probably
been
going to be
opened?
resistance.
Mhm.
I certainly had my
Did you?
resistance going through it. I mean, it was, Mike had been talking about it for a couple of years before I actually started doing it. But then once I started doing it, I was like, oh, this
I
is
remember.
truth.
I
can
remember
feel
when you
truth.
first started doing it, because you were like,
Yeah.
God, this thing is like you spoke about it
Changing.
highly a number of times of how it felt in your body.
I
How
call
good it
myself
felt.
a born again bowspringer.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like too, it feels more like a feminine way. So much of yogic culture can be very sort of masculine and militant. So it's nice to return to more feminine roots.
Totally. It's interesting. One last thing I'll say is one of my longest yoga teachers, aside from my grandma, who was my first yoga teacher when I was 13, but one of my longest yoga teachers was Iyengar teacher, Kofi Busai, and he studied
Okay.
directly with Iyengar. And even though it's Iyengar and it's still that like tuck the tailbone, that kind of position, Kofi is an African. He's, he's from Africa. So he's always like, Willow, you need to stand like an African. He's always
really?
trying. Yeah, he was always working that same thing that Bowspring is working. So it's not that there's not yoga teachers out there who don't have the awareness of the lifting of the rib and the lengthening of the belly and the opening of the throat. They definitely do. It's just not common,
Okay, fun.
Yeah.
We'll catch you on the flip side, y'all. Love, love, love.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks for tuning in. This episode was hosted by Tantric Sex Master Coach and Positive Psychology Facilitator Leah Piper, as well as by Chinese and Functional Medicine Doctor and Taoist Sexology Teacher Dr. Willow Brown. Don't forget, your comments, likes, subscribes, and suggestions matter. Let's realize this new world together.